Welcome to class 2, God, People, and Sin. So if we were to use theological terms, we would call this theology, anthropology, and hamartiology. Okay? So we're doing this whole class in just 6 weeks. So think of this as a systematic and biblical theology light. In other words, it's impossible for me to cover all the topics. Even just if all we did was talk about God himself today, we couldn't get through all the attributes. People have written volumes on these things. So think of this as a good crash course, a good introduction. But there are great resources that go beyond what I'm going to talk about. And you should know that I am just scratching the surface. And so we're talking about theology to start. Theology proper. And really the presumption that we come to the table when we talk about theology is that God is knowable. And that's quite the presumption, isn't it? That God is actually knowable. And that it matters to know God. Now, if God exists, then of course it matters because he created the universe. So I am assuming that you believe in God. The question then becomes, who is he? You know, whenever you are training up a young toddler, the first thing you teach them to do when they meet a new person is say your name. Hi, you know, I'm Emma. We're teaching our daughter to say that. And that's actually kind of hard to say. God has made himself known in different ways. And one of the primary ways is through names. And then we see his attributes. And we see his works. The way that we can know God is varied, but there's only kind of a small set of things that theologians talk about. And so what I'm going to focus on today is the attributes of God. And if you look at the very end of your notes, you will see a list of the attributes of God by A.W. Tozer here at the bottom. And he's written 2 volumes on this. And so I want to draw your attention to that because, number one, when I read it in college, I definitely read one. I might have read both of them. You will get a much deeper flavor of God's attributes. So they are God's infinitude, God's immensity, God's goodness, his justice, his mercy, his grace, his omnipresence, his immanence, his holiness, his perfection. And that's just volume 1. So when you do systematic theology, think of it like systematizing a person, which could be sort of insulting if it's your friend. Well, Joe always does this in the mornings. He always gets here at 5:45, sometimes 5:46. And he is dependable, right? We sort of categorize people based on their actions. So while we talk about God's attributes, and by the way, you are faithful, Joe, so thank you for showing an attribute of God by coming every morning, every Friday morning. When we look at God's attributes, we're really looking at the characteristics based on his action. Okay? You don't give someone an attribute based on anything other than what they do or say. That's how we experience other persons in our world. Okay? So while I'm saying these are the attributes, the characteristics, the nature of God, in a sense, we only know that because God has decided to act. That God exists, that God has acted. And thus we can know him. Otherwise, we can't know a person. So I have picked arbitrarily the attributes of God that I want to talk about. But I will say that I picked these because I think that they matter to me. They're not talked about often, and I think that they'll matter to you. So there are way more that I'm going to talk about, but these are the ones that I thought we could talk about today. The first one is that God is the uncreated creator. When we talk about God as creator, I slipped in uncreated as well, because it's very important to know that God is the only eternal being. John Piper once said in a sermon on how to seek God when you don't really want to seek God, what do you do? And he was talking about being healthy and getting enough sleep, because he would often have people come in for pastoral counseling, and they'd be like, I'm depressed. And before he got spiritual, he got really practical, and he said, well, are you getting enough sleep? And they'd be like, well, no, I'm not getting enough sleep. Well, get enough sleep, man. It's like you kind of do the things, right? It's kind of like we were talking about that. I'm growing a lawn right now, and there's certain things I do, and it works. It just works. We need sleep because we're created beings. God, John Piper said, is the only uncreated being. And he doesn't need sleep. And in fact, he doesn't sleep. And when we try and go without sleep, we are acting outside of our nature arrogantly, and we suffer for it. We're actually trying to be like God in a way that we're not meant to be like God. See, there's communicable attributes and uncommunicable attributes of God. And R.C. Sproul talks about this. Communicable, think of it like communicating, okay? It's where I can transfer something from me to you, Mark, okay? And there's different ways to do that. But then if there's an uncommunicable attribute of God, it means God has it, but we don't get it. It cannot be communicated to us. It cannot be transferred to us. And God's uncreated creator, like sovereign creator of the universe, is an attribute that we just simply can't have. It's uncommunicable. And when we act outside of our nature to try and be like God's uncommunicable nature and characteristics, then we are acting arrogantly, because only one being is that. And so it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the Spirit of God hovered over the waters of the deep. And when you read the Hebrew for hovered, it's actually this beautiful thing. It's this beautiful picture into the personality of God. The word for hover is really more like shake, to vibrate, to quiver. And so we see the very nature of God as creator hovering over the primordial deep, as it were. The earth was formless and void, it says. In other words, it was a big lump of nothing. And God formed it. But before he formed it, we see his characteristic as creator, anticipating by quivering, hovering over, and anticipating by his Spirit what he would do. God is Spirit, and he is Creator Spirit. So I wanted to make sure that we talked about the creeds as we go along. So I'm actually I did print this off. I'm going to pass this out. Here's a couple for you, Mark. And in the very first line of the Apostles' Creed, I'll let you pass those back there, Jake. The very first line of the Apostles' Creed. Actually, did I pass that? I think I passed out one too many there. I've got 6. Let me snag that. Okay. You have multiples. Okay. Here you go. The main one I want you to see is the Apostles' Creed there. The very first line of the Apostles' Creed is, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. Okay? So the Apostles' Creed is the earliest creed in church history that we have. And it's not quite as long as the Nicene Creed and also came earlier. We don't know the exact history of it in terms of when it was codified, when it was initiated. But we know as Protestants that it has been used throughout the ages to help the church combat heresy and to anchor us in what the Bible teaches. And so what comes before the creeds is the Bible. And then the creeds just help clarify in a systematic way and in a summative way, a very clear way, what we believe, right? And so the Apostles' Creed starts with, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. It's important to know God as creator. It's important to know God as eternal spirit. Because God, it says in Scripture, God is spirit, and he seeks worshipers who will worship him in spirit and in truth. And so part of knowing God is also getting to know ourselves, okay? So while his nature as uncreated creator is uncommunicable, what is communicable is creativity. He is spirit, and we have a spirit. We aren't only spirit, but we have a spirit. And so knowing God as spirit helps us know ourselves. Knowing God as creator helps us know ourselves as beings who could potentially be creative. I think in some sense we all are. But starting the creed with, I believe in God. God the person, not God the idea. God the Father. And not just any father. I was telling you guys, my daughter called me the daddy of daddies, which I never told her that. Like, I told her about God being King of Kings, and then we're walking through the woods, and she said, you're the daddy of... God is the Father Almighty. Almighty. Doesn't just have some strength. He's got all the power. And he is the creator not just of earth, but of the heavens. The galaxies that we've discovered and the ones that we haven't yet discovered and seen. It's unfathomable. God is unsearchable, the Psalms say. That means if we tried to search out the very edges of the universe of knowing God, we would still not be able to search all of God. They say that, YouTube has videos constantly being uploaded. I don't even remember the stat. But there's another example is there's 10,000 new books published every day. I do know that. That's unsearchable, but it's still finite. God is both unsearchable and infinite. And that's a huge difference between us and him. That makes him holy, which is the next major topic I want to talk about. That God is holy, meaning he is other. So when we talk about the holiness of God, a lot of times we think, okay, he's holy and we're called to be holy, but I'm not holy, so what do I do with that? So let's first talk about what the holiness of God is, and then let's talk about how that impacts us and how that matters for us. So in Leviticus 22, verse 32, it says, do not profane my holy name. I must be acknowledged as holy by the Israelites. I am the Lord who makes you holy. In John 17:11, we hear that God is holy again. Jesus is praying to the Father. I will remain in the world no longer, but they are still in the world, and I am coming to you. He says, Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one. He is holy, and he is Holy Father. And in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15, it says, but just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. In Isaiah and in chapter 6 and in Revelation chapter 4, the angels, the creatures cry out, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Holiness is a primary characteristic of God. And he is the Holy of Holies. That's why in Hebrew and in Greek, and really even in our language, in our language, which is also called English, when you use something 3 times, it means you really mean it. Holy, holy, holy. It's like, yeah, all the way. He is totally holy. And so what does that mean? The most essential meaning is other. But here's the problem with that. Or separate from. But the problem with that is that there are other holy people and other holy things. I mean, especially in Eastern religions, they talk about holiness, sacredness. So, and in older religions too, there's this sense of purity, ritualistic purity, and you have to become holy in a certain. So it's like, well, what does it really mean? So let me simplify holiness for you, because the holiness of God is one thing and our holiness is another thing. God's holiness is like any other holiness except for it's God. So he is wholly other, but the thing that makes him holy is who he is as a person as a whole. Okay? So if I were to say, Mark, you're holy, well, it's relative. Right? Mark, you're holy, you don't drink. That's different. That's other than other people. And do you see what I'm saying? That's the essence of what holiness means. But holiness for Mark, well, Mark, if you're like me, you've got sin in your life. So you're holy, but there's other areas where you're just like everybody else. Okay? So when we talk about God, God is holy in every respect. He is completely different. He is totally separate. He is totally unique and other. But yet he says, be holy as I am holy. So there's a communicable aspect to this. So here's my tip. When you think about the holiness of the people of God, when you think about your own holiness and the process of becoming holy, which is called sanctification, think of it like this. God is totally holy, pure, and by my proximity to him, I am considered holy. And the closer I get to God, the holier I become. We will never become flawless and 100% whole in this life in the sense of perfection, but we can become whole. We can become holy. We can become purified and undivided, and we can become sanctified and different. We can be different from our previous selves, and we can be different from the world. We can become holy, but only to the degree that we are close to God. In other words, God is the quintessence of holiness for Christians, and really for human beings, whether they know it or not. But yet God is holy, holy, holy. God is also transcendent. Meaning, and this is connected to his holiness, meaning that he is beyond, he is other, he's independent of the world. And so he's not only different from the world, but he's not dependent on the world. And in fact, he doesn't need the world to exist. A lot of people talk about, why did God create the world? It's because he needed to share. God doesn't need anything. God is 100% independent, sustainable. Out of his joy, delight, love, and his purity of self-giving heart, he created the world. But he didn't need it. He doesn't need you. He wants you. So that's part of his transcendence. In Job 36:29, it says, who can understand how he spreads out the clouds and how he thunders from his pavilion? God is so beyond us, we actually can't understand him. Yet, while he's transcendent and wholly other, he's also eminent. And here's how I want to spell this term, because I don't want it to be too confusing. Eminent is different than eminent with the I there. Eminent means that God is present. He's like, think of it like this. This is going to be a little funny, but eminence is like when I'm from back there and I'm all up in here. I'm like right up in your grill, okay? God doesn't get up in our grill in a bad way, but he is eminent in the sense of like, boom, right here. He is present, existing in the world. He's there. Not just there, but there. That's the eminence of God, which makes him knowable and graspable. One of my favorite passages about this is John chapter 14, starting in verse 8. Philip says to Jesus during what's called the Olivet Discourse, the night before Jesus is crucified. Philip says, okay, this is cool stuff, but Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. And Jesus says, don't you know me, Philip? After I've been among you such a long time, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? He's this close. It's me. God's immanence is instantiated by the incarnation of Christ. So the best example of the immanence of God was the very person of Jesus. But yet, because God is spirit, he is also immanent with each and every one of us. In Jeremiah 23:23, it says, am I only a God nearby and not a God far away? The implication is, yes, God is transcendent and wholly other and independent, yet God is nearby. And we see this again in Acts chapter 17, verse 24, starting in verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. And he doesn't live in temples built by hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, Paul says on the Areopagus, to the philosophers of his age, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determines the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, catch this, in verse 27, though he is not far from each one of us. That's huge, man. When we are thinking about our own journey or those who are lost, he is not far. He is immanent to each one of us. And that's huge, man, because I don't know about you, but I feel far from God. You know, at different seasons of my life, I have felt very far from God. And those seasons sometimes go longer than I want them to. But yet other times I feel the immanence of God. It's kind of like, you know, when you can feel someone breathing on your neck. Emma does this funny new thing where she wants to whisper stuff in my ear. She'll be like I was trying to put her to bed, and they always come up with distractions, right, to keep you engaged so they can stay up longer. And so I'm like shutting the door, and she goes, let me whisper something in your ear. How are you going to say no to that? You know, it's okay. So I come up, and she just starts whispering gibberish, and it makes me laugh. And I think God has this invitation to us where he says, hey, let me whisper something in your ear. He wants that relationship with us. He wants that. He is immanent. And sometimes we feel it more than other times. And usually those are the times, other than the dark night of the soul, where we simply respond to his invitation to, hey, come here and let me whisper something in your ear. In Psalm 139, starting verse 7, it says, where can I go from your spirit? How can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. And if I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, the psalmist says. And if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. And if I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. God is immanent all over the universe. And it's important to know that, because when you feel like God's not there, you can remember, no, his character, his attribute is immanent for every human being. I actually don't believe that God cannot be close or around to sin because he's holy. There's a certain sense in which that's true, okay, when people talk about that. God can't be around unholy people, right? And that's why we must be forgiven, right? That's true relationally. But physically, proximity-wise, God can absolutely be around sin. It's called the incarnation. When Jesus was dining with the prostitutes, the tax collectors, and sinners, don't you think he was kind of around the sinners? That's God's nature, okay? And so even in the depths of your sin, God is still immanent because he pervades the entire creation. We can't escape from God. Relationally, we can. But because God is spirit and he is immanent and transcendent, both at the same time, he is infinite yet intimate. We have no chance of escaping him if we want him. And so that's why it says, God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. What's that movie? Interstellar. Have you guys seen the movie Interstellar? It was kind of this, it's been a while since I've seen it, but the idea is that there's this other dimension, like right beyond. Okay? So think of the spiritual realm as like maybe in one of those cartoons, you can kind of just zip down this and like step into it, you know? It's like right there. I felt like Interstellar ended poorly because they tried to make physical this abstract like other dimension. I was like, no, that doesn't work. You tried to. It's like when you hear a Christian song that's really explicit, not with bad language, but really explicit in the sense that it's really clear and it says exactly. It's like, no, dude, there's mystery. Okay, it's like something should not be said. We should just. So bad Christian art or bad art, period, is when you try and say too much. Movies sometimes do that. With God, it's like theology can go that way too. There's a mystery to God. There's this sense in which we can know God, but we can't know God. But yet, we can feel his presence. In other words, his immanence is more like this other dimension that's around us. His presence is felt, it's knowable, but it's sort of like, if you've ever read the book Flatland, okay? This is really interesting. So the idea in Flatland is that, and it's really creative. We had to read it at Franklin High School when we were taking geometry to kind of understand the dimensions. So it takes the idea that that when you're in one dimension, you can't understand the other dimensions. So Flatland is the experience of a one-dimensional object going into a two-dimensional existence. So you start with the dot, then the next dimension in Flatland is a line, and then it's a plane, a two-dimensional plane, and then there's, then you've got a three-dimensional object. Okay, so at each dimension, it's kind of like the characters in the book. This is a math book, people. Okay, the first character in the book is the dot. Okay, and the dot experiences the line as a dot. Okay, and so it's like, well, that's another dot, and so the dot doesn't understand the line because the line is in a whole different plane. It's like a bunch of dots put together, right? Well, then the line intersects this two-dimensional plane, but it doesn't understand the plane because it's just a line. And when it goes through the plane, it can't feel the whole plane. It can just experience the plane. And really, the fact is, it can only see the plane as a line. And then the plane can only experience this three-dimensional object as another plane because it can't see beyond two dimensions. And the idea is when you get to the end of the book, I actually was like, wow, this is like an argument for the existence of God. So it's building this whole kind of understanding mathematically that the box feels something else from a different dimension, but it can't see it, it can't perceive it except in three dimensions. And I thought, oh. And we know that there are at least 6 dimensions. People have said that. Philosophers, right? So there's a spiritual realm out there. We just don't have the categories to truly understand it because we're like a dot trying to understand a line, or a line understanding a plane, or so on. We're so finite, we actually can't understand other dimensions, and God transcends our dimension, yet comes into our dimension to make himself known. And then we find ourselves confused because it doesn't quite make sense. And it's because we're three-dimensional objects trying to understand the fourth dimension. That's the idea. Was that clear? I know it's a little kind of wild, but
it's far out, man.
It's far out, dude.
That was really good.
Flatland is the name of the book. There's a whole book about it, so I'll let you read that. I want to keep talking about God because he is the center of theology. And one of the things you think about who God is that he's immutable. I-M-M-U-T-A-B-L-E, immutable. Means he doesn't change. Mutation, immutable. He doesn't have mutation to him, which is really nice if you're in relationships with other people, because people are so flippant and they change so much. It's like, come on, people. I get on to my wife about, she loves to make pancakes. And she found the recipe that we all like the most in our family, or at least I like it, and they like it too. It's my favorite. And it's just like oatmeal pancakes. She makes it incredible. And I'm like, this is amazing. Why would we make any other pancake? But yet, for about a year there, every other Saturday, she'd make a new pancake recipe. And it's like, no, just make the pancake that we all love. And she's like, well, but it's boring. I want to try something new. It's like, no, just be immutable in your pancake creation. On the serious side, though, you're married for 25 years, and then someone says all of a sudden they're a different person, and they're out. One of the ways that we can talk about God is by talking about what God isn't. And there's a whole sort of realm of theology called apophatic theology. Okay? I'm going to write that word down. Apophatic theology. And it's simply theology done in the negative. God doesn't change. God doesn't lie. God doesn't die. God isn't like the leaves that fall to the ground. He is not darkness. He is light. God is not cruel and unusual. And one of my favorites is that God doesn't change. He was and is and will be. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. And again, that's just scratching on the surface. I'm going to go ahead and, let me give you one more thing. And this gets into other kinds of theology. So there's pantheism, and this is more just kind of educational here. There's pantheism, panentheism, and theism. Those are there's a lot of different theisms, but I wanted to talk about those because God is not creation. God is the creator, but pantheism means God is everything. Pan is the Greek word for God, for all. And so pantheism means God is everything. And this is actually more tempting to believe than you might think. And in fact, C.S. Lewis, before he was a Christian, was a pantheist. Did you know that? There's a great book called The Most Reluctant Convert. I heard they made a movie about it, but in it chronicles the journey of C.S. Lewis from, I think it was atheism originally, then pantheism. It's like, okay, everyone has their own journey, right? I believe after pantheism, he became a panentheist. So pantheism means like God actually is everything physically. And so like some versions of this would be like don't harm creation because that's God, okay? And also you are God. You're a part of God. The creation itself is God, okay? But then panentheism is very similar to that, but it's just that God is in all. He isn't all, but he is in all, and that is the substance of his being. So in other words, and in fact, that's probably one I want to study more because I don't really understand that. But I want you to be aware of it. And then after C.S. Lewis was a pantheist, then he became a theist, which is like good progress, man. He still didn't believe in Jesus, but he believed in God. And that was on a train ride, or a bus ride it was. He got on the bus, not believing in God, and after he got off the bus, he believed in God. And then when he was 31 when that happened, then when he was 33, he started believing in Jesus. And that was on a sidecar. Apparently travel was the thing that converted C.S. Lewis. But it was one of those things. It was like the moment the switch flipped, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, those moments. But his journey involves that. Anyway, I just wanted you to be aware of some of those other theisms. God is not creation, is what I'm saying. The last sort of 3 things I want to talk about have to do with this dilemma that people often find themselves in. Actually, sometimes it's called a trilemma. Okay, so you've heard this. I know you have. And it comes in the form of a question. How can God be all powerful, all loving, and yet evil still exists? How could God have all the love in the world and all the power in the world, yet let evil things happen? God doesn't exist, man. It's like, that's a good point. If you're honest, it's like, okay, how does that work? But Ravi Zacharias says that's actually too simple for who God is. Why not call it a quadrilemma or a quintilemma? So God is all-knowing, yes, but he's also all-present, meaning you're not all-present. So, and you're not all-knowing. So even though you think you are loving and you think you understand love, God knows all, and so his love is textured by all knowledge and all presence. And so really, it's not just that he's all-powerful and all-loving, he's also all-knowing and all-present. And he knows all and is present at each moment in eternity. So our explanations don't all come at once because God knows all and has a plan. In other words, God's smarter than you. His love is more textured by knowledge of and eternal existence than you. So it's actually pretty arrogant to say, God's all powerful, I understand that. God's all loving, got that. And so how could evil exist? It's like, dude, no, it's not that simple, man. A trilemma should actually be more like at least a quadrilemma, maybe a quintilemma, meaning you add his all omnipresence and omniscience. So we often talk about that God is impotent. Not impotent. It's early, man. Omniscient. No. Omnipotent. Omnipotent. That's the word, omnipotent. That's one of those like little clips. So Chad's blank, man. It's like I'm looking at the words, not coming out of my mouth. God is not just omnipotent, meaning he's all-powerful. He's also omniscient, meaning he's all-knowing. And he's omnipresent. So those are big words that mean big things that you've got to pronounce correctly. So I just wanted to say, a lot of times when we're talking about who God is, we simplify it too much. In other words, it's not just one characteristic here and one there. They all go together and actually create a really complex person, being. There's a great book called I and Thou by Martin Buber, who was, not Bieber, but Buber. No relation to Justin. So he's a Jewish philosopher, and I and Thou is based on this idea that God is a thou. Okay? So I guess it would be called New English, which is what they used to speak English in. Thou is the direct object form of you. Okay, so when we say you in English today, we could mean you as the subject, meaning you go to the store, or I give something to you. Okay. And talking about a thou is to make God both a direct object and he can be a subject. So we often think of God in his parts. But if we think about God as a you, as a thou, we think of God as a person. And so there's a distinction there. So Martin Buber's whole philosophy is predicated upon the fact that we can't parse people out and to make them only a direct object. They're also, in this case, subject. So inanimate objects are objects. They can't do anything, right? But when we treat God as merely a direct object and not as the subject, not as a person, we make him the object of something. So in other words, we think of God as this cosmic slot machine, and if we just kind of pull the lever, we'll get what we want. That's how some people pray. They see God as an object, not as a subject. He's both, but he's primarily subject, right? They think of him as a genie in a bottle. You got to kind of do the thing and say the things, and then you can get the wishes that you want. Like he's an automaton, like, yes, I am creator, I will do. It's like, no, dude, he's a person. And that's what Martin Buber's whole thing is that we can treat God like a utility, like an object that we can use. But he says, no, he's a thou. And so one way that we do this that just really wrecks our lives, by the way, people do this, some people do this to other people. They make them an object. It's called slavery. It's called sexual abuse. We turn a person into a thing. And we can do that with God when we don't think of him as a thou. The way that we can do that is by dividing people up into their constituent parts. Okay? So for example, you could see me as just a big bald head standing up here with the light shining off of it. And it's like, dude, I can't get over his bald head, man. It's like, Chad's a baldy. You know, oh yeah, she talks too much. She's a talker. You know, man, they're just high maintenance. Yeah, man, he's really fit. Like he looks great. He works out. Yeah, he's a bodybuilder. When we break people into their constituent parts, one aspect of who they are, we are actually, in fact, objectifying them, if that's the end of the story. And we do it with each other all the time. We do it with ourselves. And we do it with God. When we make God just one aspect of who he is. And that's, I think, probably the greatest heresy, is when people think they know God and they just say God is all loving. That is not treating God like a person, let alone the creator of the universe. When I say God is a person, what I mean is that God has a personality. How do we get our personality? Well, if we have one, surely God, the creator of the universe, does. I'm watching even my little son Joshua, he's 15 months old, coming up here in a couple days. He has personality, man. You know what personality does? Personality does things that are unique to them. And it's always developing a little personality. Whereas when someone's a baby, they just cry like a baby. They're just a baby. I mean, they do really predictable things, but all of a sudden you see, you know, for example, when he wants milk, but there's no milk available, he just puts his head down on the floor and he'll just go, "Woo!" Emma never did that. I mean, he looks very discouraged. But he doesn't understand it. You know, you see their personality come out in positive and negative ways. He can throw a ball already. He's just like, and it goes like 2 feet. But it's pretty cool, man. God has a personality, and he's a person. So when we talk about God, we're not just talking about the idea of God or the system of God. We're talking about God himself. And in the creedal language, it's, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. Father. In my spiritual formation class, I talk about God, the importance of knowing God as Father. And if you're to walk away with one name for one characteristic, one attribute of God that you can just cling on to, Father. And until you learn to pray the word Father and know God as your Father, you're going to have a really hard time knowing him. In fact, Jesus says, this is eternal life in John 17:3, that they may know you, the one true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. In that prayer, Jesus calls God Father repeatedly. God, the Father, Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. I believe not meaning just I believe that he exists, but I know him, I trust him, and I'm coming to know him more. That is God. I do want to say this, if you haven't had the chance to watch my video called The Unity of God, it's available on the internets, on YouTube, and if you're looking at this class on hymnpublication.com/courses, it's the first video. And it's kind of this preamble, this introduction to systematic and biblical theology. I have a whole thing on the unity of God, and I really want you to watch it if you haven't. It's an hour and a half, so it's kind of, dude, I'm telling you, that understanding the unity of God is life-changing. So I wanted to make sure before I moved on to anthropology that we talked about the unity of God. We're going to talk about the triunity of God after we talk about God the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, or somewhere in between there. But today we've had enough just getting to know God, period, let alone God in three persons as one. So I want to pause here for any questions, any pushback, any accusations. Online, do we have people shouting out, giving us a hey? Make sure and let us know you're there, man.
Crystal did have one question about, is there any recommended chapter to read this week from Real Life Theology?
Is there any recommended chapter to read from Real Life Theology? Let me check it out real quick. I'm trying to remember the table of contents. Yeah, I was thinking about that this morning. My personality, like teaching style with when I assign books, read the books. I don't necessarily correlate it with the lectures because they're just. So let me see here. Yeah, I'd say book 1. Book 9 and book 12, those are 3 good options for you that would correlate to this. Real life theology. What else are you guys thinking about, processing, struggling with? What's new? What's helpful? I just want to connect with you guys here a bit. Online, we can hear you too. Joe can give us the shout out. Which one of those is your favorite this morning that we talked about? One of those characteristics of God.
I'd say immutable.
Immutable.
Unchangeable.
What draws you to that today?
Well, just as you're saying, is that he is immanent, he's other than, and yet our natural propensity is to try to make him understandable from us, and that, in other words, we're reading him from our perspective. Just like you said with the different, the dot and the line and so forth. And that's just our natural way of doing it. And yet we need to be thinking and leaving time to really think about his otherness.
Thanks. Anyone else? What's your favorite? You just give a shout out. You don't have to necessarily explain, but what's been encouraging? What's been helpful? What are you digging today?
I like him.
Eminent.
Yeah, it's nice. Like once I reached out to him, it felt like he was like right there for me.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, the whole eminence, it's like he's in another dimension right here. And if we just reach out, we can find him. That picture is really good. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else?
You think about that dimension, it's as if we're already within his dimension. It's just that we're not given the ability to fully grasp his dimension. Because he's everywhere and we happen to be part of it. He's right in front of us and so forth.
Yeah, we're within his realm, but we just don't necessarily know it. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and move on to,
Just had another question. What were the inspirations to write the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed?
Good question. So the question is, what was the inspiration to write the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed? The short answer is to combat heresy. Church history reveals the necessity of the creeds, and in fact, there are many more creeds than just the two. But the reason that we form creeds is to help people combat false teaching. So the specific circumstances would be covered in it, would be something to talk about at a later date, but that's the essence of it, is to combat heresy. By the way, I meant to mention this. There's a really great song called "This I Believe," the Creed, and it's a song by Hillsong. And I listened to it this week because I was like, I think there's a song about this. I believe in you. There's like this whole bridge. But the chorus and the verses go through the whole Apostles' Creed. And so I listened to it yesterday looking at the text, and I was like, I wonder if they'll cover all the lines. And sure enough, they basically, in their own like artistic way, covered all the lines of the Apostles' Creed. And I was like, dude, this is great. That's impressive, by the way. Because again, they didn't do it just straight down the Apostles' Creed. They did it in this cool mix, and it worked. So it's called "This I Believe" by Hillsong. Check it out. Listen to it. Put it on replay, man. It's a great way to and we sing that at our church here. So good question. So let's move on to anthropology and hamartiology. So why are we talking about knowing who people are, anthropology? I thought this was a class about theology. Yes, it is. But knowledge of self actually leads to knowledge of God. Let me explain this. So Peter was on the boat when Jesus was walking on water across the Sea of Galilee. And the apostles were kind of like, who is that, a ghost? You know, wasn't every day that they saw someone walking on water. I don't blame them. But yet Peter said, Jesus, if it's you, call me out. Okay? Let's talk about the self-knowledge of Peter. Do you think Peter, when he woke up that morning, knew that he was going to say, when he saw Jesus walking on water, I want to do that too? Do you think he knew he was going to say that? It wasn't until he experienced God doing something that he got to know himself better. The story continues. The fact that he got to know himself experientially, that he would be like that, prompted God then to act through the person of Jesus. And Jesus says, all right, come on. He calls Peter out onto the water. And I don't know about you, but it would take quite a bit of faith to step out of the boat onto the water, believing that you would walk on it. But when Jesus called him, say, an experience of theology, in the most direct sense, because he experienced the call of Christ specifically to him, he got to know himself that he would in fact, and he did in fact, step out on that water. And would you believe it? He walked on water, which says something about God, that he experienced himself in that way. You know, he was like, wow, you know, kind of like, wow. But yet, he experienced himself in a negative way just a few moments later when it says he saw the waves and he started to sink. He got to know the weakness of himself better. And in his weakness, he got to experience God because Jesus reached out his hand and helped him up. And would you believe it that that was a sign of both grace and teaching, because Jesus said, "You of little faith." He got to know God by getting to know himself. Now, if that sounds like pop psychology, it does sound like pop psychology, but here's the difference. It's not self-knowledge in and of itself. It's coming to know self as you experience God. It'd be like knowing that you're the teacher of the classroom. That's pretty important knowledge so that you can teach well. If you don't know you're the teacher, then you're just going to sit in the chair. It's also important to know that you're the student. Because if you think you're the teacher, but you're actually the student, you're not going to have very many friends, and the classroom will not be a very pleasant experience because you're trying to teach from the student's chair. Coming to know ourselves as we are helps us experience God. In other words, think of knowledge of self and knowledge of God as experiential. And the more we come to know ourselves, the more we can know God. And the more we know God, the more we experience ourselves as we truly are intended to be. It's this dialectic between self-knowledge and knowledge of God. And so I actually think it's really important to come to know not only people, but yourself. So when I was 25, I discovered that I can, in fact, grow a beard. This was very encouraging news to me because I wanted a beard, but I didn't know it was possible to have a beard that didn't hurt. See, I tried to grow a beard, and every time it grew out, like maybe 5 days, it started to just like ache because my skin would get dry. And so I was like, oh, I can't do that, and shave. And then I discovered a thing called beard oil. And lo and behold, beard oil is for beards so that you can have one, and it feels good, and it's okay. It was during that season of my life where I was starting to get to know myself better. And one of the things is I said, I want a beard because I like how I look in a beard. That's good news for you. No, I'm just kidding. Then you get a more beautiful face. Let's say I was beautiful. Then that would be good news for you. But to me, that represents a physical representation of a season of my life where I got to know myself better. And it was during that same season where I realized, man, I'm creative. I care about beauty. I care about aesthetics. I care about art and literature. I am creative. I got to know myself better. But here's what's crazy. As I started to implement creative projects, I got to experience God in it. In other words, I got to know myself, and I let myself be myself in the best sense of the term, as God had created me to be, which is Chad the creative. That's new Chad in Christ, not the old Chad. And as I created art and I experimented with audio journalism, I was like, this is awesome. And I got to experience how God would work in the creative process. Okay, so knowledge of self can lead to knowledge of God. Now, before we get to knowledge of your particular self or someone else's self, let's talk about the human self, period. Because that's the most standardized and systematizable. So the nature of man, number one, is infleshed. So in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, let's kind of the two aspects of who we are that are important for understanding the human being is that we are spirits in flesh. So we'll start with spirit as imago Dei. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Let us make man in our image, God said, in our likeness, and let them rule over the and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. The essence of what it means to be made in the image of God is that we have a spirit. Okay? We have a spirit that is like God's. We aren't the Spirit of God, but we have a spirit which is like God. And the nature of that spirit is that we have work to do, that we reign with God and on behalf of God, and that we are free. We work, we reign, and we're free. That's contextually what I think it means to be made in the image of God. You know, you can kind of impose on the text certain things, but what does the text say in the context of being made in God's image? The very next thing is, let them rule. The one thing that makes us different than creation is that we dominate it. Okay? What does God do? He reigns. So I would say, number one, it's that we have a spirit, we have a will that is independent and dignified as God's is, as different than animal spirits. So they have a spirit that I don't really understand, but it's different, okay? We have an image of God's spirit, which means that we work. So we reign and we work and we're free. So we see that we work because in Genesis it says that God placed Adam in the garden to work it and to take care of it. Okay? And we are free from Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. It says, and the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because when you eat of it, you will surely die. We often go to the hey, don't do this thing, the command part, but we skip over the fact that you are free. Literally, God says you are free. Those words came out of his mouth. Was it Hebrew? I don't know what words it was. But he said you are free to Adam. You, Jake, are free. That's part of what makes you made in the image of God. So we are spirits that have a will to work, to reign, and we're free to make choices. That's the essence of who we are. And when you try and take those away from people, if you try and take someone's work away, if you try and take their freedom away, you better watch out, man. Because people will go after you. Why? Because we are made in the image of God. The most demoralizing, undignified thing that you can do to a person is take away their work or their freedom. Period. It's because that's who we are, man. So if you're not working, it's like, dude, you need to get a job. You need to grow your grass. Do something. You need to work. Not work because you got to do work. You work because God works. And God wants you to be a part of his work in which we reign. And if you take away someone's freedom, man, it's like, you better watch out, dude. And that's the difficulty when you're training a disciple, when you're training up your kids, and when you're dealing with yourself, is they are not machines, man. These little people that I'm called to raise up in my home, they have little wills and they're free. And so Emma received candy from her grandparents. Well, actually, her great-grandparents. She got 2 York patties, 2 Reese's, and 2 Rice Krispies. And I wanted one of those Reese's, but they were Emma's. And so I said, Emma, can I have one of these Reese's, right? It's normally the reverse. She's like, can I have dessert now, or can I do the... So, but I was like, I want to respect her will and her little person. And so I said, can I have one of these Reese's? And she said, no. She's free, man, right? Like, And part of her freedom is she owns things. She gets to make decisions. And I didn't want to circumvent that. God doesn't circumvent that with us. In fact, it's very important, so important, that he allowed humanity to fall as a whole, just to be consistent with our nature as free beings. Yet we are also enfleshed. In Genesis 2:7, it says, "The Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." The phrase living being in Hebrew is nefesh chaya. One of my favorite Hebrew phrases. Okay? Nefesh means flesh, and haya means being. Your translation probably has living being. What's interesting about this is that it has nothing to do with the fact that we have a spirit. It has everything to do with the fact that we are enfleshed. In other words, a lot of people use this passage to talk about the fact that we are different than animals, when in fact it's the opposite. This passage, this phrase is used in Genesis 1 and 2 to talk about specifically animals. They also are living beings. They also are nefesh chaya. And so Genesis 2:7 is simply saying that we are made of dust, man. We're animated physical objects. That's what. Now we're more than that, but we're also that. We are nefesh chaya. We're living flesh. And I think it's important to know that we are both spirit and flesh. We are both temporary, and we have an everlasting component. It's important, I think, to talk about we don't have eternal life. There's only one person who has eternal life, because eternal goes in both directions. We have everlasting life because we have a starting point, and in Christ we can live forevermore, but we don't have eternal life, okay? Neither is our spirit eternal. We are created beings. We are nefesh chaya. We were formed at a particular point. Metaphorically for us from the dust of the earth, but for Adam, it was the actual, and we are made up of dirt, man. And that's, in a sense, it's helpful to know that we're just dirt. But no, we're way more than that. So we're not just, our bodies are just dirt. And that really helps when you're combating sin, to know that you're made of flesh, man. You're carnal. You're made of this world, the stuff of this world. You've got biochemicals and synapses that aren't programmed the way you want in your brain, and heart palpitations, and my hands go numb sometimes because I have carpal tunnel syndrome, and that's hard, and I'm tired, and I get cranky, and I get hangry, and it helps to know that our flesh, Jesus says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Okay, our flesh has a weak, unformed nature to it when we are unsanctified. Okay? And even when we are sanctified, there's an element to it where we're still enfleshed and we still have this, it's like, man, can we go to the next life already? Because we get a new body. But to deny the fact that we have flesh is really harmful too. And that's where some of the pietistic traditions in history have erred. And so, here's what I want to say. This is a theology of, we're getting into a theology of sin here, but the bridge is the fact that we have flesh. And so here's what I want to say. In Genesis chapter 4, we see sin rear its ugly head really for the first time with Cain and Abel. Where Cain kills Abel, but before he does, God says, sin desires to have you, but you must master it. There's a sense in which, like James 1 says, Why are there conflicts between you? It's because of the desires that rise up in you. And where do those come from? They're fleshly desires, okay? The sin nature, in a sense, is not really a thing, okay? What's more a thing is just the fact that we have flesh. We're embodied beings, and that sometimes, where a lot of philosophers and theologians can go wrong is to say that flesh is bad. That's actually a whole thing in philosophy. And so Jesus came in flesh, right? So it doesn't mean that flesh is bad. It cannot mean that, because Jesus was perfect. So what that means for us as infleshed beings as well, the incarnation that is that we can master it because of Jesus. Now, can we do it flawlessly? Well, that's irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. We know we can't. Okay? He who denies he has sin is a liar, 1 John says. But that's not the point. The point is that in Christ we can become strong. If we were to say the opposite of no, we can't master our flesh, we can't rule our own bodies, then that would be contradictory to Scripture as well, because God has given us power. He's given us all things for life and godliness, 2 Peter says. So knowing that you have flesh is really important because, number one, you embrace your weakness and you don't pretend like you're immutable and you don't pretend like temptation won't come after you. You put up, if you're addicted to porn or you were addicted to porn, you put up the filter so you can't go to certain websites, man, because you got flesh, dude. Yeah, the spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. But it can become strong, okay? There are certain sins that don't have to haunt you for the rest of your life. So on the one hand, flesh is important to know about because of your weakness, but also the fact that you can get swole, as they used to say when I was in high school. There's this little picture of me, and they falsely attributed a little saying. It's like they were trying to advertise the workout center in the gym at Franklin High School, and they took a picture of me. They're like, "Can we use this for the yearbook?" And it just said, "I like to get swole" under it, okay? And I was like, I didn't say that. They were just messing with me. Put it in the yearbook. In Christ, we can become strong. We can overcome the desires of our flesh. And here, so when you study the sinful nature in the Bible, it's actually not as much of a thing as you might think. In fact, the phrase sinful nature in Greek only comes up once or twice. Most translations are translating the word flesh. So I'm just going to drop that bomb, and you can kind of do some more research, or we could talk about it later. But what I want to say is, you're not enslaved to a sinful nature abstractly forever. You have flesh, but God has given you dominion. God has given you the ability to be formed and transformed. Knowing yourself as both spirit and flesh, but not as always and inherently flawed all the time. Like you're always a sinner. You always have sin, but you're not always a sinner. That's huge. And so the nature of sin, hamartiology, which comes from the Greek word hamartia, which means sin. Hamartia here is sin. Hamartiology is the study of sin. This is the most helpful thing for me. So when we look at Genesis chapter 3, the story of Adam and Eve with God, we see that sin creates separation. Separation from God, from self, from others in creation. The first thing that Adam and Eve did when they sinned was they hid. And God went looking for them. Where are you? Even in our sin, God pursues us. But that separation is real. The shame and the guilt are real. That's the first separation that comes from sin. But there's also this sense in which sin causes us to separate ourselves, to be from ourselves, to be divided. They all of a sudden realize, oh no, we're naked. You know, what was that moment like, right? At some point, our kids realize they're naked. But it's so cute when they just run around the house naked because they don't know they're naked. In a sense, it's because sin has not really gotten so deep. Separation from self feels like I don't do what I want to do. Separation from self feels like I'm stuck and I can't get out. Separation from self feels like shame. Like I am a terrible person. Can I cover it up? Can I hide? Can I go away? I don't want you to see me, God. Separation from self is when you do things you don't want to do. Sin comes from that and leads to that. Separation, and that's why they covered themselves with leaves, and then God dignified their shame with sacrificing an animal and gave them clothes, which was a prelude to the sacrifice of Christ, who covers us and our shame and our self-separation. And so in a sense, God makes us one with ourselves. I know that sounds a little cuckoo, but when you are comfortable in your own skin, we say, God is the one who makes that possible. And why? Because he takes the separation of self that comes from sin and he makes you whole. And so I'm more comfortable with myself than I've ever been because I know God, I guess in a sense, more than I have. I feel less divided than ever. I've lived in one place for more than 2 years. From age 18 to 34, I lived in about 20 different places. I've never lived in one place for more than a year and a half, I think, until the last 2 years. Our culture supports and feeds a divided self. We're also separated from others. What happened when sin entered the world with Adam and Eve? The woman you gave me made me do it. And she said, well, good point, but the serpent told me to do it. You know, we immediately turn on ourselves. Sin is the cause for relational separation. The conflicts that we have between people come from sin. So sin separates us from God, from self, from others, and even in a sense from creation. That's why childbirth is painful, God says in Genesis 3, and that work includes thorns. The redemption of all of that is beautiful. The reason we feel great about good relationships with other people is because it is the experience of the absolvement. There's a word there that I can't quite grasp. It is the dissipation of the effects of sin that separate us from the other. I love a close relationship with God because that's the opposite of what sin causes. When work goes well, when we enjoy it, it's because that's the redemption of the fall in a small sense, in a moment. I want to talk a little bit more about redemption, and then we'll kind of wrap it up for the day. So we've talked about God, we've talked about people, and what I want to do as we close today in class 2 is talk about the redemption of God through his covenant faithfulness. There's covenantal theology, the Adamic and Noahic and Abrahamic, the Mosaic and Davidic covenants, and they all have nuances. Covenantal theology has to do with, at essence though, the fact that God makes covenants. He makes promises. And he made promises to different people throughout history, all of which are important. But the big takeaway for us as everyday theologians is that God makes promises. And the big promise was to save us. All the other covenants they're almost like chapters in the story. And the original covenant of redemption was between the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. God covenanted with himself to do it. And then he covenanted with people. He covenanted with us that he would be faithful. And what's amazing when you look at the covenant between God and Abraham, which was really the longest lasting, like the Noahic covenant and the Adamic covenants were really kind of temporal and specific to those situations, about the flood and about, you can't go back to the tree of life, those kinds of things. But with Abraham, God said, I will make you into a great nation. I'll bless everybody through you. It's like, oh, that's a big promise, man. But the way he seals it in Genesis 15 is beautiful. In what's called suzerain vassal covenants, back in Abraham's culture in his time in Mesopotamia, the way they would make covenants was by severing animals and walking through them. And this was the way that the two parties, as they walked through these severed animal parts together, was to say, hey, this covenant, this promise we're making to each other, if we break it, either one of us, may we be like these animals. That's why they did it that way. And so you see that God does that with Abraham in Genesis 15, but guess who doesn't walk through the animals? Abraham. God walks through it himself, it says. And he was faithful to the point of death through his son Jesus, even though we were the unfaithful ones. He became like those dead animal carcasses on our behalf in the person of Jesus to show his faithfulness on our behalf. God's covenant faithfulness was typified and instantiated through the life of Jesus. And so now the process of sanctification is what comes after salvation. And that's really where we find ourselves as Christians. So we enter into this new covenant, this new promise where God will be with us forever. But yet we've got this problem, right? It's like, great, relationship redeemed. What about my flesh? What about my fallen nature? And part of what God does is he doesn't just save us, he also says, and I want to make you new. And that's part of the new covenant. The new covenant is not just, hey, I'm going to save you when you die. A major part of the new covenant is you get a new heart. So a lot of people talk about Jeremiah. Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? And then they end there. That's their theology, that's their anthropology and their hamartiology. That their heart, our hearts are corrupt, deceitful above all things. Okay. Which means, really, there's no hope for me. I'm just deceitful. At the end of the day, so are you, man. That's just the nature of our hearts. It's like, dude, have you read the rest of the Bible? And maybe you've done this too. The heart is deceitful above all things. You can't trust it. You can't trust your own heart, man. Really? What about the new covenant? In Jeremiah 24, verse 7, God says, I will give them a heart to know me. By the way, that comes 7 chapters after Jeremiah 17. Jeremiah 17 is not the end of the story. I will give them, they will be my people, and I will be their God, for they will turn to me with all their heart. How is that possible apart from Jesus? Jesus leads to a new life in this life. Jeremiah 29:13, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. Jeremiah 31 and 32, this is my favorite. The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant that I made with their forefathers when I took them by hand and led them out of Egypt, the Mosaic covenant. Because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. This is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after that time. I will put my law in their minds, and I will write it on their hearts. Jeremiah 32, verse 39, God says, I will give them singleness of heart and action, so that they will always fear me for their own good and the good of their children after them. And in Ezekiel 11:19, it says, I will give them an undivided heart and put a new spirit in them. I will remove from them their heart of stone and give them a heart of flesh, a soft heart, a heart that is malleable, a heart that can change. In the new covenant, because of Jesus, we don't have a heart that's deceitful above all things. We have a heart that's new above all things. And that's who you are in Christ. You are not bad. God has made you new. That's a different ball game when your heart is not deceitful above all things, when your flesh is not bad. The heart can be deceitful if we go back to that slavery. The flesh can tempt you if you do not let God form you, but God has given us a new heart. And that's the intersection of theology and anthropology, is covenant theology based on the person of Jesus, who was the fulfillment of broken and lost relationship. And I love the fact that God says, I am one. And by the way, he says, I will rejoice in doing them good and will assuredly plant them in this land with all my heart and soul. God has called us to love him with all our heart and soul in Jeremiah 32:41. And then he enables us to return the favor. He is one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. And he makes us one. He gives us singleness of heart and action. He unifies us. May they be, Jesus said in John 17, one as we are one. I in them, and they in me, and you in us. God brings us into his being in the sense of we don't become God, we become like God, and we're welcomed into the nature of God. God's communicable aspect and attribute of oneness is something that he imparts into us, and that is a beautiful thing. It's a game changer, man. And that's why it's important to not only study theology, but understand anthropology and how the two dance. Because when they dance together to the music of Christ, it's fun, man. And it is a different tune. And when we march to the beat of that different drum in this world, people will be like, huh? That's how evangelism, I think, should work. And that's how our sanctification works. It's not so much by discipline, but by dancing.